Hello, and thank you for tuning in to our show, Take Notice. I'm your host, Lisa Charney, and today we're talking about the homeless population, specifically the one-day homeless count. And today our guest is Brian Eggers, and he's with the San Mateo Human Service Agency. Thank you so much for being here today and discussing this important topic.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I work for San Mateo County's Human Services Agency, also known as HSA. HSA is the county's public social service agency and has services such as general assistance, CalWorks, employment services, and also houses the Children and Family Services Division. I work in the Collaborative Community Outcomes branch in a unit called the Center on Homelessness.
So homelessness is a very complex issue. There doesn't seem to be one solution for all. So can you give a brief overview of how the county is handling this?
Yeah, so HSA supports homeless services kind of centered around three main aspects. The first one is we partner with community providers for safety net and homeless services. So HSA actually doesn't provide the services. We procure services through contracts with the county's general fund and Measure K funds for services such as outreach services, emergency shelters, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing programs. So that's kind of our first bucket of work. The second aspect, we are the lead continuum of care agency. Our community receives federal funding from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, and with that comes some responsibilities of monitoring and coordinating those funds. So our agency has those responsibilities, which includes, again, monitoring and coordinating those funds, applying for these funds, which is an annual competition. We have a database, and we supply data to HUD on a regular basis. And then the third kind of work is around coordinating the homeless system as a funder of homeless services. So back in 2016, HSA released a strategic plan on homeless services. It was a collaborative process with all of our community providers, and it looked at our past data's performance, looked at best practices, and really identified the strategies we wanted to focus on over the next couple of years that we've been implementing, focused on housing first practices, lowering barriers to ensure that those who have the highest needs have access to programs, expanding our rapid rehousing capacity, implementing our coordinated entry system, and offering training and technical assistance focused on motivational interviewing and housing-focused case management.
Our viewers have heard of the biannual one-day homeless count. For those who haven't, can you please expand a little bit on that and explain exactly what that is?
Yes, so the one-day homeless count, it's a snapshot point-in-time count and survey of those experiencing homelessness in our community. It's one data point that we collect among many other data points that we look at to really help inform our local resource planning. So the one-day homeless count, the most recent one we did was in January 2019, on January 31st. And there's really two main aspects to the count. There's an unsheltered count. We had over 300 volunteers from our community providers, our cities and our towns, fellow county employees, and we had community expert guides, those with lived homelessness experience, fanning out across the county, street by street, doing an observational count, and then attempting to survey individuals. So we had an unsheltered count, and then we also had our sheltered count. So we had data of those individuals and families living in emergency shelters and transitional housing programs. And it's really those two sets of data that combine to give us our point-in-time snapshot count of those experiencing homelessness in our community.
And when we say one day, how many hours is this in one particular day?
Yeah, so the unsheltered count is really the big lift where we need a lot of volunteers in that. The day of the count took about 5 hours. It was from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. on January 31st.
And if somebody wanted to volunteer to do this, how do they go about doing that?
So prior to volunteering, we asked folks to sign up online, and we broke the county into kind of 10, we call them deployment areas. And volunteers had an opportunity to pick an area they may be familiar in or live in. And once they signed up, they then had an opportunity to sign up for a training. We offered 30 trainings in the month of January on the weekends, at night, for scheduling purposes. And they attended kind of an extensive training where we went over the methodology, the reason why we do the one-day count, talked a lot about respect, treating people with dignity and respecting their homes and their property during the count. We went over the survey, and we really set expectations during the day of the count. The morning of the count, everyone showed up bright and early, and at one of their deployment sites, they were greeted by a volunteer captain, matched with another volunteer, potentially matched with a expert community guide, someone with lived community homelessness experience. And they got a map of a census tract, and they went out and covered that map street by street, doing observational counts and attempting to survey individuals who are awake and approachable to get more information.
Explain the purpose of the one-day count.
Yeah, so the one-day count serves two main purposes. The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, we do receive funding from HUD for our homeless services, and one of the requirements of that funding is our community needs to conduct a one-day count at least once every 2 years within the last 10 days in January. And they actually gather data all across the country from all of the communities receiving HUD funding, and it rolls up into a national data set that's then relayed to Congress for funding. The second set is it's used for local planning purposes and helping to identify what our strategies will be. We look at this data set from the one-day count along many other data sets. We look at how many folks have exited to permanent housing, how many new households have become homeless for the first time, how long households are experiencing homelessness in our community, and we take all of that data to really inform our local resource planning.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I understand that the volunteers are directed through an app on their phone?
Yes, this year we used a mobile application for our count and survey.
Interesting.
Through our procurement processes, we had a request for quotes, and the company Simtech Solutions was identified as the application to go with. They have an app called Counting Us, and we use that again for the count and the survey. And volunteers were actually able to download the app on their phone. So during the trainings, they were able to see the application, to practice the survey. They were actually able to practice at home as well, all the way up into the count. The app allowed us to infuse instructions and scripts in the count, and so that way questions can be asked consistently throughout the county. And we got a lot of positive feedback from the volunteers about the user experience with the app.
This sounds like a really big undertaking. How do you prep for this?
So generally we start about 4 to 5 months out planning. Again, it's a big lift with 300 volunteers methodically going throughout the county and doing this count for us. We spend a lot of time identifying what questions are asked in the survey. There are some questions we're required to ask by HUD, and there's some questions we identify through local decision processes that we want to ask. And we're very mindful we don't want to ask so many questions, and we want to make sure we're going to use the data from the questions we do ask. We spend a lot of time prepping the training materials and a lot of time recruiting our volunteers. They spend a lot of time in this effort, and so we want to make sure that we can have enough time to make sure that they can plan accordingly to participate.
Are you able to share the results with the 2019 one-day homeless count results?
Absolutely, and they're posted on HSA's website. We have a final report that we post. Similar to our neighboring communities, and actually many communities throughout California, we did experience an increase in 2019 compared to 2017. We experienced a 21% increase, so there was 1,512 individuals identified experiencing homelessness on the night of the count. And that breaks down into 901 individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness and 611 individuals living in shelters, emergency shelters or transitional housing programs. Like I said, this was an increase from 2017, and is actually higher than the number in 2015, but it was lower than the number in 2013 and 2011, just kind of for an 8-year context or trend data. The driving factor of the increase was those who are experiencing homelessness living in RVs. There was an increase in that subpopulation. There was an increase in those who are living on the streets. There's a decrease in those who are living in vans or cars, and a decrease in those who are living in encampments or tents. But again, the driving factor was those living in RVs that led to the 21% increase compared to 2017.
What are some of the issues that, the hardest obstacles that you think that the homeless are facing right now?
Housing. Housing is extremely expensive. We need all types of housing. We need affordable housing. We need more housing, and homelessness is a housing issue, and that is the number one factor. We need housing.
How does HSA use the findings in the report?
Yeah, so HSA utilizes the data from the one-day count as well as all the other data points I mentioned earlier to help inform strategies and plan for resources. Specifically regarding the results from the 2019 one-day count and the spike in those experiencing homelessness in RVs, HSA is continuing to look at all data points that we have, including the data points from the one-day count, to help inform strategies and see if there's additional resources that we can plan for this particular population. At the same time, we want to make sure we're utilizing that data to see how our current services can be tailored and informed to serve this population. Are there strategies we can take with our outreach services or with our shelters to help communicate the benefits of these services and making sure that they have access to those services?
Any final thoughts for our viewers that you would like them to know?
I think we, at every opportunity, just want to thank the volunteers that participated in the 2019 one-day count. We had many volunteers who've been volunteering 4 or 5 times over the years, and it's a huge time commitment. So we just want to thank our volunteers, our expert community guides, for the time that they spent to make sure that we have this vital information.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and talking about such a growing dilemma in our county. Well, it sounds like the county is appropriately concerned with the growth in the homeless population. And the data that the agency collects is really providing support that we really need. For more information, log on to the website that we're showing on the screen. And we thank you for tuning in to this edition of Take Notice, and have a safe day.